Hi guys, and welcome to episode 2 of the Optics Warehouse podcast. Today it is just me, James, your host, purely because we're going to be focusing on more my sort of area of expertise, and that is night vision and more specifically the thermal side of the market. So this episode is obviously called the Thermal Jargon Buster, and all I'm going to do is try as simply as I possibly can over a short period of time is break down sort of the 4 or 5 elements of a thermal unit, what each one represents, what it means when you look at the unit, and how, of course, that can affect the price of what it is you're looking to buy, and of course, eventually onto what suits your situation the best. Now, as we know, thermal technology has been around for quite a few years now, quite a substantial amount of years. Obviously, started off in a military environment, came across the civilian market at quite a high price tag. And there were various bits and pieces, like you had a certain sensor size and a certain frame rate, and then for the civilian market it seemed like, wow, this is the bee's knees, so to speak, on the market. But of course, in the past sort of 10-15 years or so, that has rapidly improved for the civilian market, especially for the hunting community. And not only that, as I said, the hunting community, yes, it's a big part of it, but of course it does filter down into other parts, obviously, say like nature reserves, charities looking for lost people, animals, etc. So it's a multi-purpose use piece of equipment. If we focus more on the hunting side of things, it boils down to 2 types of units. You either get your spotting monocular or binoculars, or you get your thermal weapon scopes. Now, of course, each one has their own sort of price range. The thermal weapon scopes generally tend to be a bit more than the spotters, purely because there's just a bigger unit, there's more technology inside, and they're relied on for being that much better at identification than the spotters are. I mean, traditionally, spotters, if you'd asked me sort of 10 years ago what people were using as a thermal spotter, it'd be an old Pulsar HD 50S thermal spotter, and then probably like a Starlight Archer or Longbow on the back of their rifle scope, because, well, I say thermal spotting and night vision shooting was the way forward, because there's obviously you spot the heat blob, you say, right, okay, there you go, there's my rabbit, there's my fox, he's out there. You put the night vision on it and you can clearly identify exactly what it is and whether or not it's worth taking the shot or not. However, stuff has come on and on leaps and bounds since then, and there's various different bits and pieces that can confuse anyone. I mean, it's hard enough keeping up with it. There's pretty much a new unit coming out every week, to be honest. So it's trying to keep up with it, with what's available on the market, what's best for each consumer. So let alone what it's like looking at as a consumer, deciding what to buy just the once for your dedicated setup. I can only imagine. So as I say, there are a few elements to each thermal unit. So the first one is obviously the lens size. The second one is the sensor size. Third is what the pixel pitch is. Fourth is the net D, and then fifth is we'll come on to is the field of view. So there are five elements there that we're gonna talk about. I'm just going to discuss about here. That obviously you need to think about before deciding what's going to be best for your uses, for your situation. So first one is obviously the lens size. The majority of units you'll see will either be a 38/35 or a 50. Those are the two dimensions that are found to work best with various thermal units. So of course, that if we take the Griffins, for example, so you've got the GQ35, I should say, sorry, and the GQ50L, and then of course you go to the Pulsar equivalent, you've got the XQ38, and of course you have the XQ50 as well. So you've got they're the two sort of main lenses that are out there on the market, and of course what they offer is very different things. And there's a common misconception that obviously the bigger the lens, the wider the field of view you're going to see. It is actually the other way around. So if you have a 38 over a 50, you're going to get a wider field of view with a 38 than you would the 50. But because there's simply more material in the 50 on the germanium lens or vanadium oxide lens on the front, you're on a 50 and you're going to gain better detection of your target. So the 50 is really there for the detection, whereas the 38/35 is your wider field of view. So then you might start thinking, right, okay, the 38/35, that's going to be more towards my spotter, perhaps, if you want to go for the spotter night vision route. there's not really that many other variety of lenses. I mean, you get 25s, 15s and 19s in the HIC range, and that's purely because it caters for different price brackets. And of course, you can vary the fields of view on that as well. So it just caters for all sides of the market. Next one to really talk about is the sensor size, and you'll see two figures that are thrown around quite a lot. And that is 388 by 280. And sorry, that's a light 388 by 288 and 640 by 480. And what that basically means on the small sort of blottometer sensor that actually draws in the heat, that means the amount of pixels that can pick up heat on the unit. So obviously you can generate the image that you can see through your screen. So the 640 by 480, that is obviously the bigger one and the better one, hence the price difference. And so what I generally tend to say to people is, oh yeah, with both units you'll be able to tell that's a Fox at 100 yards, there's no doubt about that at all. However, with the 640, you will be able to identify further in depth of the fur of the actual fox, and more importantly, a big key identifying factor of a fox, you'll be able to pick up the brush of the fox quite well. So if you can pick those out fairly well, then obviously you'd be good to go. I mean, it depends how much you go out foxing, really. I mean, personally, I go out foxing 3-4 times a week, so obviously a higher resolution thermal is going to suit me, because I'm going to be seeing a lot of different animals out at night, and it could vary between what the targets are and what's going to be best for my situation. So yeah, I'd find the top of the range sensor to be better. I mean, if let's say you're at close range stuff like ratting or rabbiting under 100 yards, you don't really need to go for a 640 by 480. I mean, it could very easily talk you into one. I mean, there's no problem with that at all. But of course, the 388 by 288 sensor is going to be absolutely fine for those sort of distances. As I say, because the whole 100 yards thing, you'll still be able to identify what that animal is. There's no doubt about that at all. So if you're shooting rats at 25 yards, I mean, they're pretty easily identifiable if they're running around in a barn or something like that. So it's you're really not gonna struggle too much. You wouldn't feel like you're losing out if you didn't get a 640 by 480 sensor unit. It really sort of comes into play more so on the thermal weapon scopes, and I'll get into the ethics of it in a minute. But if you were to choose a thermal weapon scope rather than a spotter, let's say, it's a tricky one. I mean, there's some super duper scopes out there at the moment. I mean, like, top two on there at the market are obviously the Thermion 2 XP50 Pro LRF and the Stellar SQ50. I mean, both of them have some of the best sensors on the market available, and you can get a lot of good identification out of those things. But I've been shooting for the best part of 12-13 years now, and I'm still a firm believer that you will never get as good identification as a thermal as you would out of a night vision unit, and that's because it's just using artificial light, whereas obviously you're relying completely on heat with thermal. So it's an interesting ethical point of view. I mean, for someone, say if you've been using a thermal spotter for years and years, and you move on to a thermal scope, yes, that's fine, because maybe you know what you're looking out for. But someone that's starting up, it's not something I'd recommend, because you just looking through a thermal weapon scope or a thermal imager, that can really sort of deter and not help your distances at night, because it really does makes it look a lot further away than it actually is at night. And then if you drive past it during the day, you think, oh crikey, look at that, it's only like 80 yards away. It looked about 200 yards away last night. So it's a tricky one to think about. I mean, if you're looking at it for the first time, I wouldn't go for a thermal scope. I stick with a night vision scope. But say if you're a seasoned thermal spotter shooter, then yeah, if you go for a thermal scope, I mean, it's complete covertness. You go for a top of range one, I say like the Stellar or the Thermion, you're not going to go too wrong at all. And it brings on to the next characteristic, which is net D. So net D is the abbreviation for noise equivalent temperature difference. And what that basically means, it allows the lower that is, because it's measured in kelvins, which is of course a true measurement of temperature rather than degrees C or Fahrenheit. It's a way of telling you that the sensor can pick up more heat, so or lower heats, I should say. Sorry. So if you have a unit like the Stellar SQ50, which has a sub 35 millikelvin rating, that means that it will pick up stuff at a lower temperature. So therefore, that as a counter, as a point on from that, basically it means it can pick up a better identification of the quarry that you're shooting. Whereas you have something sub 50 millikelvin, what that basically means is you might not exactly get the identification there that you would with a sub 35. Even better than that, obviously the Pulsar now have sub 25, so they have. So again, as an effect on that, of course, you can just pick up a better identification. NetD, as I say, has been the biggest factor, I'd probably say, over the past year or so. You keep seeing companies compete against one another, saying, "Oh, I've got a better NetD here, here, and here." So it certainly is the latest thing to be the best on. There's no doubt about that at all. However, I think one of the most important things to look out for, and on to the next one, is pixel pitch. Now, you will see on... Let's take a Pulsar Helium 2 XP50 Pro, for example. If you look at one of the Optics Warehouse listings, that'll say on there, Pulsar Helium 2 XP50 Pro, 640 by 480, which you've already discussed, and then it'll say 17 UN, which means 17 micron. And what that means on the 640 by 480 sensor, it is basically the spacings between each of those pixels. Now, obviously, 1 micron is ridiculously tiny. Off the top of my head, I think it's 1/10,000th of a millimeter. I can't remember what it is exactly off the top of my head, but it's a minute measurement just like that. And so if those pixels are closer together, so 17 micron is the standard average. So if you get something that's got 12 microns, like the Stellar SQ50 or the Griffin GQ50L by Hick Micro, then you're going to get an even tighter definition once again. So you tie all these things in. You've got a high-res sensor. You've got a really close pixel pitch with 12 microns. You've got a sub 35 millikelvin rating. So something like the Stellar SQ50 or the Griffin GQ50L, those are going to produce the best sort of image on the market available at the moment. So it's all these little things to take into consideration. So you can have a variety of different bits and pieces. You can have something that's got 12 micron spacing, be a 388 by 288 sensor, but then as I say, also have like a sub 50 millikelvin NetD. That's sort of the stuff like the old Helions had. So then you can mix and match between each one. It's the factor that really bumps the price up is that sort of the sensor size, so the 388 or the 640. So as I say, you mix between those three factors, and then obviously you go on to lens size and field of view, which I'll come on to in a minute. Then you're going to get, obviously you whittle out as to which unit's going to be your best one for your application. I've briefly mentioned field of view. Obviously, I mentioned it with the lens system. I should have really tied it in if I'm honest. But I say, if you think about your field of view, so you need to think about your situation. I'm going to present two different situations here. So one, let's say you're a rat shooter and you're shooting at 40, 50 yards in a barn. I mean, you're going to be in a sort of close proximity, don't need a massive field of view. So therefore, you're going to pick something with a big lens so you get a better identification on it. I know it sounds sort of counterintuitive to what I said earlier on, but it's, as I said, all of these are all situation dependent. So if you have a 50mm lens looking at close range, you're going to get true identification of all the rats and rabbits that you're shooting. No doubt about that at all. If you're a fox shooter, you can swing each way. That completely depends, I would say, on the topography or the lay of the land you're shooting at. So my personal experience, I shoot on Exmoor, do a lot of shooting on Exmoor. It's all big hills and valleys. I need a nice wide field of view, so therefore I can have a good scanning ability and say, right, okay, yeah, no, there's a fox there, 200 metres over there. Oh no, there's one over there, 600 metres away. I know exactly where it is. I can move on to it quickly. I can then zoom in. Yes, I may not quite have the identification just as I would with a 50, should we say. But obviously with a 35mm lens, the point is I'm able to get onto the target quickly. I can adapt to the situation, move closer, stalk into the animal, get it sorted, drop it, job done. So it's so as I say, all of these factors, all 5 of these factors, they really are just completely individual dependent, because as I say, no two individuals are going to be shooting exactly the same situation. I mean, they're going to be very similar situations, don't get me wrong, but I don't think you're going to find anyone that's in a sort of exactly the same situation. So hopefully I've gone over, hopefully I haven't bored you too much on this one, but as I said, obviously there's 5 key elements to choosing your thermal spotter or thermal weapon scope. If you take on board all these bits and pieces that I said, factor in, say, right, okay, I need a bit more of that, not so much of that, all that sort of stuff, and just say, yeah, okay, all right, okay, that's better for my situation, that's not, so okay, so let's favour that over something else. So then it decides, right, okay, whittles it down to that unit, right, okay, that's fine. Now I know I need how much I need to spend, or can I whittle that in my budget? Can I not? I don't know. So it's just working it all out is key, because as as I say, with thermal, it's an expensive game. There's no doubt about that at all. I mean, yes, you can get units at £380, but to be honest with you, they're really only sort of good up to 30, 40 yards. So it's you really have got to be exactly on it when you think, right, okay, this is what I need. This is what I'm going to use it for. That's going to be the best unit for you. So it's, as I say, this is fear of repeating yourself. Just really make sure you're aware of what you're doing, what you're shooting, where it is you're shooting, and then obviously your budget and tied into all of that as well. And then of course you can select the correct unit for you. So guys, as I say, that was just a quick thermal jargon buster. I hope you've enjoyed this. I say this has been episode 2 of the Optics Warehouse podcast. I should hope to get a guest onto the next episode. It's just this one's obviously a bit tricky not to have them on here. So obviously because I'm hosting the podcast, and obviously I do all the night vision and thermal queries here. So obviously it'd be like basically trying to interview myself. So it wouldn't really work too well. Obviously, say we had John on the last episode. Hopefully, I'm going to get someone else from the member of staff here at Optics, and they can talk about their speciality, what they feel in the fields. As always, guys, please feel free to email us any questions. We'll answer them as best we can. We'll read them out on the podcast, and we'll say, right, okay, and we'll discuss it between the team members here. But for now, thank you for tuning in. Obviously, don't forget to subscribe on your streaming service, whichever it is you choose, and we look forward to hearing from you next week.